Awesome. Hi, everybody. I am Arjun, your host. Welcome to Revenue Ramble. This week, we have Aashish Dhamdhere. He is the founder and CEO of Relavo. Let's welcome Ashish here. Hey, Ashish, how's it going?
Good, Arjun. What a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Let me make sure that I am pulling you in. It's interesting. Huh. There you go.
Yeah,
Perfect. Awesome. So let me do an intro, Ashish. You and I have known each other for, I think, a good 4, 5 years right now at this
sounds
point.
right.
Um,
Yes.
Currently, you are the co-founder and CEO of Relavo, and you are helping companies identifying the best fit accounts, which is primarily based on, the first party data, or today it's called as the signal-based selling, I guess.
Yep.
And before Relavo, you were heading the marketing at Skilljar,
Yep.
and you helped company grow. Skilljar obviously grew quite a bit during your tenure there, and you helped raise their Series B, I believe. And then before that, you were part of the demand generation function at Aptio, and before that at Amperity. Is that a good intro for
Yeah,
you?
Aptio
Would you like to add
first.
something?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's pretty good. Aptio was sort of my first startup. So I met my co-founder interestingly and worked at Microsoft on an incubation product called Red Dog that ended up becoming Azure.
Uh-huh.
Then
Oh,
Aptio, then Amperity, then Skilljar, and then Rello. That's sort of been the journey. Uh, Rello was my fifth startup, the first one that I've co-founded, and I've done sales and marketing roles at the other four startups before that. So I'm
understood.
I'm a go-to-market geek. It's what I love.
Yep. That's what got us together to meet and kind
Correct.
of geek out on stuffs. And you've been in Seattle all throughout.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I've been here since
Oh,
2006. That's almost 20 years.
perfect. Perfect. One of the things that I've always wanted to ask, and let me take this opportunity to ask, you did, I think, a chemical engineering,
Yes.
and then you did a master's in applied materials, and
Yes.
then you are like, oh, you know what? After doing an engineering and applied materials master's, I want to go do marketing. And this was back in the day too, right? Today, marketing has way more swankiness to it and things like that. What made you go into marketing at that time?
It's so funny you bring that up. My parents, by the way, are still hoping that at some point I'll put all the money that they spent in my engineering education to good use and take an
Sure,
engineering, a proper engineering job. They're
sure.
gonna have to wait for a bit longer. But
Yeah,
chemical engineering was really cool. It was all about pattern recognition, pattern matching. But when I was doing my master's, I realized that a career in that space is very antisocial. You're in a lab somewhere
uh,
taking readings. And what I enjoy is people, is working with people, partnering with people,
mhm,
marketing, selling. Some combination of those two things has always been in my core DNA. So
mhm.
at the height of the .com bubble is when I decided to switch from engineering to really startups, software, and
Understood.
business, and haven't
Mhm.
looked back since. That's my thing.
Understood. Understood. That makes sense. That makes sense. In fact, yeah, okay. I hadn't thought about that. The society, but the human being to human being kind of communication, that makes sense. Um, so diving deeper, one of the things that we try to do with Revenue Ramble is to kind of dive in and try to give actionable advice, examples to people. So whatever you explain for the rest of the time, Ashish, I would appreciate you give like actionable advices,
You got it.
examples, KPIs, metrics, and things like that, right?
You
So
got it.
today at Relavo, you kind of help your companies to find their next set of customers, and you have been in this space for a really long time. So let's take the last, let's say, 5 to 8 years or 5 to 10 years. What has changed, in your opinion, in the GTM motion, whether it is marketing, sales, post sales?
Great question. Even if you just look at the last 2 years, it's an interesting
Uh-huh.
snapshot on where we are. I think we look back at the last 10 years and think of it as a bit of an aberration driven by interest rates and the availability of free money. There was a lot of spray and pray. There was a lot of grow at all costs going on in the market. And like they say, when the music's playing, you have to keep dancing. So marketers and sellers did everything that they could to get scale and grow as quickly as they could. But when that tap got turned off somewhere in late 2022 or early 2023, it's changed the game, and marketers are still playing catch up with that
Hmm.
world. The biggest change that I think has happened on us is we've gone from a world where resources were not really a big constraint for marketers and sellers to a world in which that's no longer the case. Your budgets, your teams are 50% of what they used to be. And so a lot of playbooks that you've used in the past, you have to revisit and see if you can make them work at subscale or below scale levels. That's number one. Number two, personalization. We've been on this personalization journey for a long time, and it's gone from being a differentiator to table stakes. If you think about the emails you're getting in your inbox, I'm getting,
Sure.
it's no longer, you can't even tolerate emails that are not personalized to some degree, that are not relevant to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these twin forces, I think, are really big changes. They're sort of seismic changes for go to market motions where you have to go from, wow, I don't have as many resources, so I have to select focus on a core group of people, and then I have to figure out how to work them in a personalized, relevant fashion to drive results. We're still playing catch up. One last point I'll make is 2023 was sort of a mulligan year for most companies. It's like just survive, just get through it.
Mhm.
2024, though, is no longer like that. The expectations for go to market teams have gone up. You're expected to drive results, drive growth. And so you're seeing a lot more need for innovation today, suddenly.
Understood. Understood. Yeah, the ZERP era is, and whatever you are saying, it is not even 5, 10 years. You're talking 2021, 2023, and 2024. Here we are, right? It's like in 24 months to 30 months, the whole world kind of turned upside down. And I want to double click and give my 2 minutes, 2 cents, let's say, on the personalization versus. Everybody talks about personalization, right? And this is one of my pet peeves. I believe. I care less about whether they call me hello Arjun or hello whatever.
Right.
I care more about the relevance in the email, right? Are
So
they
true.
talking about a problem that I care about at this point of time?
So
You
true.
call me Arjun, you call me nothing, I don't care. Is that how you think about it, or is the personalization more like the name personalization? That
No, you nailed it. In fact, this is why we call the company Relevo. It's a take on relevance. We
relevance, yeah,
very
interesting.
firmly believe that at the end of the day, everybody's busy. You're busy. I'm busy.
Yeah,
If you are trying to get someone's attention, you have to be relevant. It doesn't
right.
matter if you talk about where they went to school, where they went to college, if they play sports. They're trying to solve business problems. Talk about that in a relevant fashion, and you'll get their attention.
Yeah, I had no idea that you named it after that. In fact, I am of the opinion that we should drop the usage of personalization and only use relevance, because personalization makes people think like all they have to do is to do hello first name.
Right?
That's not the intent, right? And you have to
100%.
make it relevant, which is a much bigger effort than just
Yes.
doing hello first name. Um, so now with that background, you mentioned about people are expected to hit their metrics in 2024, and one of the places where you are helping your companies do it well is in the ICP, right? Defining the
Yes.
ideal customer persona and finding the right customers. And so, in that way, with the customers that you're working with, what are some of the mistakes
Yeah.
that you see when companies are defining ICPs? Whether it is, and you can also define what kind of companies you work with, so that
Totally.
people understand.
Totally. Let me start there. We work exclusively with B2B companies
Hmm.
and B2B technology companies. They tend to be of all sizes. I would say more than half of them are what I call post product market fit companies. So they have 200 plus employees with the revenues anywhere between 50 and $200 million. And then there's a smaller group that are Series A, late seed stage or Series A companies that are on the cusp of product market fit or are trying to scale product market
Hmm.
fit in those ways. And the typical mistake we see, a few mistakes that we see popping up, and I've been guilty of some of these myself in the past. It's
Hmm.
so this is said with all humility. One is the the companies spend a lot of time effort in defining their ICP, and then it gets put on a shelf somewhere. So you you involve people from customer success, sales, marketing, product, get in a room, get working committees going. You prepare this document. Everybody says, "Yeah, that's great," and then it just puts on a shelf. Nobody knows what to do with it. That's sort of challenge
Understood.
number one. Issue number one. Issue number two is the definition of ICP is so broad as to be meaningless. For example, if I had a penny for every time somebody said, "Oh, our ICP is B2B SaaS,"
Yeah, yeah, that's
that's your TAM, maybe, like that could be your TAM. It could be a subsegment of your TAM, but
right.
specificity really matters. That's super important. So that's number two. And then number three is you have to keep tweaking, iterating on your ICP. It's never static because it's really a matching of what your product does, what your service does, and what the problems that the world, your target audience is looking to solve. And that depends on the economy, competitive dynamics, technology, innovation. So you have to keep revisiting it at least every 6 months, if not sooner, and making small tweaks. These are typically not, it's like driving, right? You have to make small adjustments as you're driving down the road. And which means it has to be data driven. It can't be based on gut feel alone. You can start with a hypothesis, but it needs to be a constant process of iteration. And if you do those three things right, you spend the time, but don't keep it on a shelf, which means you have to operationalize it in some ways. Two, keep making small changes, small tweaks. And three, sort of revisit it from a data perspective all the time. That's valuable. I'll give you one last bit on this, which is there's this constant fight between sales and marketing. It's sort of so cliche, but it's so true. It happens all the time where sales will say like, what are you doing? Why are you sending us these leads? Or why are you marketing to those companies that don't make any sense? And to me, the number one reason for that is a lack of an ICP or a shared ICP. Sometimes this is dangerous. There are multiple ICPs. There's one marketing ICP and sales ICP. So it's a very foundational construct that the whole company needs to be aligned around, and then you need to work from there.
Yeah, it's so interesting that as companies grow, they don't even talk about ICP between them, right? Marketing will go take their ICP, their account target list, and do a bunch of demand activities. Sales will do their own outbound SDR and cold calling, all of that with a totally different account list. And these have like what, 10% overlap between them, and won't create enough impressions on the customers from both angles, and the whole thing will fail. So that's interesting. I want to double click on the changes that you mentioned, but before we get there, can you explain, take any example and define a good ICP for our listeners? And from there, I would like you to talk about in 6 months, what are the kinds of iterations that you would make on this example ICP?
Great question. So a good way in plain English to think about your ICP is if you had a perfect prospect or customer in mind, how would you define them? What are the pains, needs, challenges, buying triggers, or other attributes that you would use? Firmographic, technographic, how big is the company? What industry is it in? What geography is it in? That combination of characteristics is what makes for a good ICP. The key challenge or the key gap is most companies define their ICP purely on firmographic or sometimes technographic characteristics. They'll say, as opposed to saying B2B SaaS, we know that's not a good idea. They'll say B2B SaaS between 200 and 500 employees in North America that use Salesforce. Okay, good, right? But not great, because great would be that are following the account-based motion, that are trying to hire sellers, that are struggling to integrate, and I'm making this up, right? Depending on your company, anything that adds on the use case, challenges, or buying triggers bit on top of firmographics and technographics makes the ICP more specific and helps you zoom in on companies, people that care. Let's go back to relevance. You said it beautifully. Relevance is table stakes. Relevance is what you should shoot for. Relevance is the intersection of a problem I'm trying to solve or a pain I'm dealing with and where you can help. And ICP is really that, is the mental model for that you can use. And the crisper you can get on that, the better the hit rate, the better the response rate that you can get from your prospects, because you're talking to people that care. You don't have to get them to care. They already care.
Yeah, understood. And so let's take that example, right? It's a B2B company, 200 to 500 employees using Salesforce, and with, let's say, growth that is higher than 10%. They have a marketing function with more than 5 people. Like you add a bunch of layers. And then how do I think about changing this ICP in 6 months? What am I looking for to make this change?
Great question. So let's say we started with a baseline. We started with a definition. And there's a set of signals that I'm using to define my ICP. What you really want to look at is when you reached out to prospects, let's say you reached out to 1,000 companies in that quarter, where did you book meetings? Where did you get opportunities? Where did you close deals? And then you want to look at the correlation of each of those things that we just talked about and those outcomes that we're looking at. And typically what you'll find is there are 1 or 2 or 3 conditions that rise to the top. Things that have really high correlation with success. That's good. That's your lookalike model that you can use. There are other things that are either not correlated or negatively correlated, right? Some combination of those 2 things. which means then you have to go back and ask yourself, do those things matter? I'll give you an example. We had a customer, they thought mergers and acquisitions would be a really good signal, meaning any company that has had a recent M&A activity of some sort would be a good prospect. Well, there was a negative correlation between that and meetings
Oh,
booked.
interesting.
And we were like, what happened here? So we went back and looked at it. Turns out if you separate mergers and acquisition, they had a positive correlation for mergers, meaning when you bought a company, you acquired a company, the deal velocity sped up, the deal size was bigger, and the conversion rates were higher. But if you got acquired, the deal just died. And it's not a surprise, right?
Right.
Somebody
That
came in
makes
and bought
sense.
you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of tweaks you want to. So a lot of it, it's qualitative and quantitative, meaning the data will give you a starting point, but then you have to
Mhm.
ask yourself, what's really going on here, and use that to make these small tweaks over a period of time.
Understood. Understood. That makes sense. That there's an interesting thing that when I was at ZoomInfo and we 35,000 customers and all these companies are trying to use ZoomInfo to find their ICPs and engage with them. One thing that I observed was ZoomInfo has more than 100 filters that you can put to get to the people and companies you're looking for. There were 4 filters that people were using. 70 something 77% of the sessions, meaning one session is like when somebody is
Wow.
putting some filters, right? 77% of the sessions have 4 filters: United States,
Yeah,
then employee range, job title, and one more, I cannot remember, it's industry or something like that, something very simple. So these are the 4 that everybody will put. And what happens is that will get them, and with ZoomInfo's database, they are going to get, I don't know, 50,000, 70,000 companies and like
totally.
10 million people. And they're like,
Totally.
okay, now I got my ICP. I'm going to email these 10 million people randomly, right? It's insane. But I like what you said. The finding that proxy that adds the relevance is the most
Bingo.
important thing. And the way you are articulating it is to find the proxy is the key. And
Yes,
as you look into the data, you have to find what is that proxy that is either accelerating or decelerating your meeting booking and engagement. Based on that, you make
exactly right.
changes. And I see. Perfect. Okay. Now, if I switch back and ask, like, what are the common symptoms or what are the KPIs that a company can look at to know whether they have or when they don't have an ideal ICP?
Yeah.
What are the
Oh,
KPIs to
I
look
love
for?
this question. Love this question. So what we like or recommend is working backwards and looking at win rates and looking
Okay.
at all the way from closed lost deals and saying, what's our win rate look like? What is the deal velocity and what's the deal size that we're typically getting? And from there, then you can go to opportunity conversion rates, meeting booked rates, all the way to the top of the funnel. Here's a sign, a leading indicator of this. Typically, what people do is they'll reach out, or they used to do this anyway, reach out to a lot of companies and figure out the small group of companies that actually care about solving that particular problem. That's the number one sign that your ICP is not right. Because what you're doing is getting your sales team, your outbound team typically to do the hard work of figuring out your ICP on the fly. Knock
Mhm.
on 100 doors and ask, do you want a vacuum cleaner? Well, wouldn't it be
Right.
nice if you knew the people who already had a vacuum cleaner? Or even better, people who had a dirty house and didn't have a vacuum cleaner. And that's the ICP. Like that right there is the ICP. So if you find yourself knocking on a lot of doors and you're converting a very small percentage at the very top of the funnel, that means you may not have a sharply defined ICP. That's symptom number
Understood.
one,
Got it. Okay.
right? And then symptom number 2 and 3 would be velocity, which is ultimately the faster a deal moves, the better fit there is between need and solution from a deal customer perspective. So if you find your deals sort of trundling along slowly and dying on the vine, that might be because you are about 30% right in your ICP. They care about the problem, kinda, but you
Mhm.
don't have it finely tuned where they care about it right now. It's not one of the top 3 things that they care about. So that's symptom number 2. And then symptom number 3 is a wide variation in win rates or deal sizes also, where you're closing big deals in some cases and tiny deals in other cases, and the company profile is not that different. It means you're missing a variable somewhere
Uh,
of people who care about it more than others. I think those 3 metrics are a pretty good place to start.
Perfect. That's awesome. I think that's very crisp for people to look at. I have two follow-up questions. The second thing that you mentioned about, like the deal slowing down, or like it's
Yeah,
coming up to the funnel, but it's not it's dying on the vine. I just want to distinguish that it could also be a problem with the sales process itself, not only
no
the
doubt,
ICP. Right. Yeah.
no doubt.
So
Yeah,
yeah, if
yeah,
you're facing that, and you have to look at, is it my sales process?
totally.
Because I just went through this, right? I just changed my demo, and I posted it on LinkedIn earlier. Basically about the I changed the demo to look at Docket's data itself instead of Slack's data. I made a bunch of changes in my demo, and immediately I saw a big boost from first demo to second demo. So it could be ICP or your sales process that you want to go look at.
Totally.
So that's awesome. Um, Okay, so that is the
This is,
common
what's
thing.
interesting is that point is what makes go to market always so fascinating to work on, because it's always a combination of an art and a science. It's never the interpretation part is why you have to be curious at
Mhm.
all times and look at a bunch of different things all the
Yeah.
time.
So I know you mostly work with companies that are more in a stable situation where they can look at win rates, they can look at deal cycles, deal
Yeah,
sizes, all of that. But a lot of our listeners are also startups. So if
sure.
I'm a startup trying to get to my, either 0 to 1 or 1 to 5, whatever my phase is,
Yeah,
what are the KPIs that I can look for to
love it.
see whether I have an ICP or not?
Love it. So you should think about this as it's a scientific experiment at this point. What you're really saying is, look, we don't know what great is. We don't know what our bullseye is, but let's start by defining some cohorts that we can test carefully and properly. And a big challenge that most startups face is because they're throwing a lot of things at the wall to see what sticks. Then
Right.
it's very hard to figure out what's actually working at the end of it. And you can't separate randomness from a pattern that's coming up. So a good thing to do is to say, we don't know what our ICP is, but can we at least work through what it could be? And based on that, then can we test maybe 2 or 3 variations at a time in a given quarter? And it could be variations based on use cases, based on industry, based on geography, based on company size, some big variables that you can start with. And then maybe next quarter you can say automotive, making this up. Automotive seems like we're getting a pretty good hit rate. Can we now break that down further into something else? Or it could be a use case. It could be like compliance is the use case that seems to be landing for us. Can we now look at that and add the vertical angle to it for compliance and see what the breakdown looks like? So some combination of those things. And the metric you want to look at is easy. Are you getting that first call? You talked us through it. If you don't get the first call, it's not working, right? That's the best leading indicator. If you're getting the first call and then you're getting a demo, great. If you're not getting the demo, all right, something's not working. Let's go back. So it's really step by step, seeing if you're getting the conversions you need and if the feedback is interesting and important too. For example, you changed up the demo because in your demo delivery, you were probably picking up a lack of engagement or a lack of feedback or a lack of something, and you
Yeah.
diagnose that problem. So in your journey, always keep an eye out for those signs, which is when we're reaching out, are we just getting crickets or are we getting pushback? When we make that first call, are we getting engagement or are we just getting blank looks? And then you can make tweaks on the basis of it. And then eventually you'll have deals, etc., to work out too.
Makes sense. Makes sense. That's super actionable. Taking a slight side turn, right? I'm sure you are also seeing, and you're probably playing this game. AI is playing like a really
Yes.
big role in GTM right now. So the question is, how is AI, in your opinion, evolving and impacting the whole GTM now
Yeah.
and in the coming years?
I love it. I'd say the biggest impact that I'm seeing AI make is when human beings are figuring out how to use it in something that they're doing themselves from an end user perspective. And if you're a content person, AI is such a game changer to start with just one use case. As a writer, and a bad one at that, the biggest challenge is that first draft. How do you get a good first draft that you can then tweak? And AI has that problem solved. You can feed it any, Claude or Gemini or Chat GPT, some bullet points, and it's going to give you something that you can start with. So from a content gen perspective, I think AI is a complete game changer. And when you look at Sora and some of the other things that are coming out, it's going to be a
Definitely.
completely different world. And
Yeah.
particularly the problem I'm excited for it to solve is this idea of campaign creation is so painful and expensive today. You may have ideas on testing different segments, et cetera, but you have to wait 3 months, 6 months for the content to get done. If you can compress that to weeks, days, you can test more things and you will learn faster. And you don't have to spend a ton of time and money to do that.
So the campaign, you're talking about the ad copy, the creatives,
Bingo.
that needs to go through design and then marketing, and it takes time because typically marketers engage with agencies which are outside the companies, and now you have to work with them, communicate,
Totally.
get the first draft, second draft, just an iterative weeks worth of stuff, typically 1, 2, 3 months. So you are
Totally.
saying that AI is fast forwarding all of that and bringing it down to, like, let's say 3 weeks instead of 3 months.
100%. And it could be landing pages. In addition to what you talked about, it could be landing pages, white papers, blog posts, could be all of that, really.
Yeah,
A lot of potential to do that.
understood.
But it's also earlier on, like there's an intersection of this with ICP. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead, Arjun.
No. I was just saying. I was going to ask where you were going. I was going to say, is that the marketing side? Then what else was what I was going to ask? Please go ahead.
Perfect. Perfect. So there's an intersection with the ICP side too, which is when you figure out these signals, what you really need is the ability to track these signals across thousands of companies. And what happens today is the best sellers are already doing this individually. They are already going on the company website, the LinkedIn page, regulatory filings, job listings to figure out if this company is a good match. The key
Mhm.
concern, challenge being, you're a human being. You really can't do that for more than a certain set of accounts at a given point in time. That's number one. Number two, stitching these signals together is non-trivial. You have to remember multiple data points for every customer on an ongoing basis. AI is absolutely a game changer here in that regard, in terms of the number of accounts it can track, stitching the data together, and then telling you, you should care about these companies for these reasons. I continue to see AI making a huge impact on that front now and leading out into the future. Anything where there's pattern recognition, I see AI being super helpful. Co-piloting or co-working, I think, is the next step, which is once you figure out who you're going after, how do you help the human beings be more productive in what they're doing? And I think this trend of smaller, leaner, more efficient and effective sales teams and marketing teams is here to stay. And AI has a big role to play in it. Clearly, you believe that too, just based on
Yeah.
docket. But I think that's the future.
Absolutely. So a couple of things that we do right internally. So when we want to create website pages, and this is directly going to your thing, right? How do I get that first draft out there? So I tell my team, hey, I need a page on, let's say, security. That's like a thing.
Yeah,
So what my team does is it'll go to our call recording software, and they'll put security,
love it.
data security, all of those keywords. It'll pull up all the calls where I have mentioned, clients have mentioned security, take all of the snippets out, put it into ChatGPT and say, give me a website copy. I'm a product marketer. Get right prompting. Boom, you get the first draft, which exactly covers all the questions from my customers, all of the best answers. Today, I give my best answers. So all of
Yeah,
that is coming into a
yeah,
doc, right? So it is phenomenal. The other thing, that the agent research that you mentioned, right?
yes,
These GPTs have, OpenAI has released GPTs. So I do this big time. To your point, I go to website, I do job, all of that. So I created a GPT called Company Research, which is in publicly in GPT. A bunch of people are using it actually. Instead of now me going, what I do is before my call, I'll go to this GPT and say, just give the company name.
yeah,
It'll give me like a listed things that I care about. Who are the founders? How much money have they raised? The
yeah.
industry, and they'll give all this in a tabulated format for me. So in one look, I'm like, okay, perfect. I see it, and they give me the website URL. I click there and go look at everything. I'm ready for the call, right? So
Huge.
yeah, it's absolutely game changing. So I just wanted to put examples to both of the use cases that you mentioned. One is the marketing side, one is on the
Good
sales
one.
side.
One other
Yeah,
point to
perfect.
make here quickly is
Yeah.
AI is clearly good at automating things you want to do and you
Mhm.
can't do. We've both given examples of what that looks like. It's also phenomenal at finding patterns that you haven't even thought about. Right?
Mhm.
I'll give you an example of this. We have a security customer, and they suddenly started figuring out that companies with active ESG initiatives were a good prospect for them. This is a year ago, right?
Mhm.
And we're like, this company has nothing to do. It's a security product. It has really nothing to do with ESG initiatives.
Yeah.
What's going on? Oh, then we figured out Every time you have an active ESG initiative, you're sharing data with a bunch of external stakeholders. When you do that,
Oh,
security becomes extremely important. So
crazy.
AI found this link that no human being could have thought of. Now, to action it, you still need human beings, like to figure
True.
out what to do with it. But I think that's also going to be super powerful. This unsupervised learning that's going to come out of this,
Mhm.
the AI wave is going to be huge.
Awesome. Oh, wow. I had no idea. So, we talked about the ICP mistakes. We talked about a little bit of AI. What are some of the other common mistakes that you see companies make in their GTM? Is there another pressing thing that you're like, oh my God, another company making the same mistake?
Yeah. It flows from the ICP conversation we were having, which is when you have a good idea for your ICP, I see a lot of peanut buttering today in go-to-market strategies, which is you have a budget and you literally take a knife and spread that budget across all the prospects you want to reach. That's a recipe for disaster. What you really have to do is think about go-to-market strategies in terms of portfolio theory. You have the budget you have, right? You have to figure out how many stocks and bonds you need to buy to hit the returns you need, which means you need to concentrate your resources on segments within the market you want to reach.
Mhm.
Also, what you want to do is within each segment, then figure out the right set of activities that map to that particular segment and the content that you need. And what I find is a lot of companies think like this, but the process of going from we want to do this to actually doing the campaign design is very ad hoc and is gut driven, and it's not an iterative process. So I see this being a huge game changer. And here's why it matters. It matters because of what we where we started the conversation. You don't have the resources you used to have, which means you better be very careful about ROMI and ROI on every dollar that you're investing, which means you have to figure out where am I going to get the highest bang for the buck, very high opportunity cost for every dollar invested. And I think that's what's going to drive people to get really uh, structured in creating go to market campaign strategies and tiering and segmentation and applying it. Uh, the B2C folks have figured this out a long time ago. That's all they do.
Mhm.
But I think B2B will catch up to B2C
Yeah,
here shortly.
understood. So you're saying that basically experiment enough, compartmentalize enough, segment enough, and then start spending with conviction on some segments rather
Yes,
than peanut buttering into everything.
totally right. Totally right.
Okay. Awesome. This is awesome. So Ashish, this is really good conversation. I wish I had more time with you on this one, but I want to flip and move into another segment. This is more like, you have to pick one of the choices. We'll give you like a topic and then you have to pick
Okay.
one or the other, and then
Okay.
give me like a quick answer as to why you picked that or why you didn't
Got it.
pick the other one, right? It's a this and that section. So the first one, I'm going to start here. The ICP definition, what do you believe in? Firmographics based data, like company, industry, or would you say that for ICP definition, behavior and intent data is bigger?
Both. You need both.
Yeah.
But if you put a gun to my head, I would probably pick behavioral data first. The only color that I would add here is interest and intent are not the same things. You have to be very careful about this. Just because somebody's showing interest doesn't mean that they're showing intent. So that behavioral data is a starting point. Start there.
Interesting. Okay. The next one is ICP flexibility. So I think you talked about this a little bit,
Yes.
making the ICP very rigid, keeping it flexible and adaptable. So I think I know the answer, but why don't you go ahead?
You have to keep it flexible and adaptable. That being said, time box it. This can't be something you keep changing all the time. So it has to be somewhat stable for a quarter at least, but then you can go back and revisit it.
Yeah, but you advise something like a 3 to 6 months, go back and look at it.
Correct.
Sometimes you change, sometimes it is working, sometimes you don't change.
Correct. Correct.
Perfect.
Correct.
Perfect. Okay. Uh, the next one, the ICP segmentation, right? Would you segment the ICP based on different use cases or keeping it like this is my company's ICP? What's the better approach here?
No, great question. Definitely segmenting it. The segmentation could be by use cases or products. And this completely depends on what products you have in your portfolio and how many different use cases you support. The thing you have to be careful about is there's probably a sweet spot. No matter how big you are, you're going to be resource constrained. So you have to pick the top three
Mhm.
or top five. And you can't really go beyond that from a efficacy perspective.
And is this true for startups also? Like I understand when the companies have an Act 1 and Act 2, they are totally
Yes.
different ICP. For a startup also, are you saying that segmenting by different use cases is important?
Very good question. Remember, you asked me what are good indicators of early indicators of success. When
Yeah.
you test, this is the way to do it: is to have segments that you're testing based on some criteria. It could be use cases, geography, vertical, combination, and then you don't have to keep doing this forever. But having a mental model of, there are different segments that appeal to that where we could play, and we're consciously picking this segment because we tested the others and it didn't work is really a good way to think about it. You may not want to have two segments in market at all times, especially if you're early stage, but at least think through what it could be.
Perfect. Okay. The next one for the ICP. Would you favor the brand awareness and inbound tactics for your ICP, or would you go outbound ABM tactics?
Oh man, I love it. I'll give you a non-answer answer here. I think
Okay.
intent and interest is really demand capture. This is people who
Right.
are already looking for a solution and interested in a solution. So if you have enough people there, start there because there's something there. And you still want to look at fit for those people. You don't want companies that would never be a good fit for you just because of their interest. You don't want to chase them. So that's really step number one. What most companies ignore is demand creation, which is where the outbound ABM tactics come in. That first sliver is never going to be big enough for your long term growth. So, what you have to
Mhm.
do is then say, okay, great. Let's then figure out how we're going to create these are the people that are going to show intent in the future. What are we going to do for that?
Yeah. Okay. So if I were to, you're saying that for the current ICP that you have, you can start favoring with like inbound tactics for the time being because there's already established demand. You're
Yes,
trying to capture that. But alongside, you also need to start thinking about, hey, what happens when the demand is done? So you have to start creating some form of a demand creation
totally,
methodologies as well alongside.
totally.
Perfect. Got you. And finally, the ICP identification. Would you use predictive and prescriptive analytics like machine learning processes or AI? And you mentioned about several manual processes also, right? Looking into the data. What is the best way to get here?
Yeah, you have to use the predictive prescriptive analytics methods, but the hypothesis creation, if you will, can be manual. You can get a set of people in the room and say, what should we test? What should we look for? And then use analytics and AI to fine tune that story. So it's really humans plus machines together is a good way to think about it. Travel knowledge can be very powerful, very, very powerful.
Got you. Perfect. This is awesome, Ashish. Like I said, I wish we could have, maybe we can do this again, right? This was
For sure.
I know you can talk about several topics. ICP is a topic that I see a lot of revenue leaders, especially in the smaller companies, make mistake. Startups all the time. So I wanted to kind of use your expertise to double click on that topic, which I think we did a very good job on. Hopefully, we'll wait for the feedback.
Yes.
But thanks a lot for doing this. Is there any parting thoughts that you have or advices that you want to put to our listeners?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. What a great conversation. I loved it. I love, anytime you want to have me back and talk about this or something else, let's do it. The second thing that I would say as a parting thought is be very careful about where you're spending your time and energy. What is ICP at the end of the day? ICP is being intentional in what you're doing. And anytime you find yourself in go to market doing something because it's been done that way or because you're expected to do it that way, stop and think if that's still in the best interests of the company. And of course, the higher you are in the food chain, the more important it is to ask this question of, is this still the right thing for us to do? When you ask that question, you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed at the answers you get back. So it's sort of a philosophical point that we can part
Yeah,
on.
I love it. That's perfect. So be intentional in what you're doing. Don't keep doing something just because you have been doing it or somebody else has been doing it. That's awesome. Thanks a lot, Ashish. This was really good, and I hope to do this again with you very soon.
What a pleasure, Arjun. Thank you. Talk soon.
Thank you. Take care.